In the previous video, we started installing and downloading a number of components that we needed to get our Android software development kit installed and set up. Now that we've done that, you can see that the download has finished and we've installed the various options. I'm going to click on Finish to close it off. And if we scroll back up and have a look now, we can see that some of the other options that weren't installed have been installed. And what we want to do now is move over to the SDK Tools tab by clicking on that in the middle there. And then click on Show Package Details down the bottom right hand corner. Now quite a lot of stuff here is obsolete, and you certainly wouldn't want to install these unless you had a very good reason for doing so. Most of what we want should already be installed from the selections that we made in the previous video, but there may be updates available, so we want to check this rightmost column, and actually check to see whether there's options for us. I'm just going to close some of these down so we can see a little bit clearer. It'll actually show updates over here on the right hand side if there is actually something to be updated. So to do that, if you found something you wanted to update, you just select it by clicking the checkbox and then clicking on Apply to install them. Now what we want to do is go through some various options here to make sure that we've got everything. So the way to do that is we're going to start off with the Android SDK Build Tools, and I'm going to expand that by clicking on this little triangle here, and I'm going to scroll right on down. And you can see we've got right down to 25.0.2. Now that's the very latest version, as you can see. It's in numerical order there, right down to the bottom. So I'm making sure that I've got 25.0.2 installed. That's the latest as of the time of this video. If you've got a later version, choose that one if it's not already installed, because you want to make sure you've got the very latest version. Alright, so we're going to leave a few of those options alone, but the one that we want to look at here is the Android emulator, the Android Platform SDK Tools, as well as the Android SDK Tools. They should all be ticked and they all should be installed. And again, if they're not installed for some reason, select them, click on Apply, and they'll be downloaded and installed. Now looking down, one thing that's not installed that we want to install is this documentation for Android SDK. Now this is extremely useful and highly recommended, so I'm going to actually click on that and we're going to get that installed. The next one we want is Google Play Services. So if we come down here, we want to make sure Google Play Services is selected. Click on that. That provides things like Google Maps so that you can include mapping in your applications. Now there may also be a Google USB driver. You probably want that on Windows, but as you can see, I'm on a Mac and it's not showing up for me. But if you see one on Windows, make sure you tick Google USB driver. Otherwise you may have problems connecting your phone to Android Studio. Now on Windows and Mac, we can see here we've got Intel x86 Accelerator HAXM installer, and I've got that installed on my Mac. If you had problems installing HAXM earlier, then it's worth ticking it here. That way you can run the installer again if you manage to get VTX working in your BIOS. This is if you're on Windows. And there is a video in this section of the course talking about that in more detail. But again, it can sometimes be worth trying again if for some reason HAXM didn't install correctly. Now if you click on this support repository and open that out, we can see that there's some other things in here, and one of the things we are going to be using is this constraint layout for Android. So you can see there's quite a few options there, and the one we actually want here, you can see we're all the way down 1.0.1, so make sure again you choose the highest number. So we're going to click on that, and then we're going to go down and do the same for the solver, making sure we get the same version. So if we've chosen 1.0.1 here, we'll choose the same under the solver, click on that, and that's going to install that, and you'll be finding out more about what the constraint layout is as you go through this course. Now the final two options should be already checked and probably installed, but make sure they are checked if by chance they're not installed and you go through the process of installing them. In my case, Android Support Repository and Google Repository are both checked and installed. Now if by chance any of these options that I've been through aren't available when you come to install the components, don't worry too much about it. Google actually changed things a lot, and you may find things like the Google repository being included in the Android support repository, for example, in which case one of these options may well disappear. So just install the ones that I have mentioned and carry on if any don't exist because there's no problems. Click on Apply at this point, and you'll get a list of all the items that are going to be due to be changed, installed or deleted. I'm going to click on OK, and we'll have to accept the license agreement again. Give that a moment to pop up. In fact, it didn't ask that, but depending on which option we chose, you may or may not get asked to accept the license agreement, and then the download will actually go through. So I'm just going to pause the video now while this finishes. Then we'll come back and finish off the configuration. Okay, so you can see that it's actually finished now. So I'm going to click on Finish. And whatever you've chosen should now be showing up, as you can see over here to the right under Installed. And you're actually good to go. So you can actually come back to this SDK Manager as often as you want to install new components or delete ones that have been replaced with newer versions. So keep in mind that if you forget to install something, it's really not the end of the world, because you can come back in here at any time and choose what you missed and get it installed. And in fact, you'll normally get a pop-up from Android Studio itself when new versions of things are available. Generally speaking, I suggest you just click on the update and install them anytime Android Studio prompts you. Alright, so I'm going to click on OK to close that and go back to the main Android Studio screen now. Now there are some other configuration changes that I recommend now to make Android Studio a bit easier to use and a bit more helpful. So we're going to start by clicking on Configure again. We're going to go into Settings. And if it's on a Mac, it's called Preferences, but if you're on Windows or Linux machine, Preferences should be called Settings. So I'm going to click on Preferences in my case. And then what we're going to look for here is we're going to go to Appearance and Behavior under here, and we're going to select Updates. And you can see at the top there, Appearance, Behavior, System Settings, and Updates. Now I'm going to recommend you choose the Stable channel here. And I strongly recommend not using any of the tools that aren't in the Stable channel, because we're here to create Android applications. We're not here to test versions of Android Studio for stability. We really want to make sure that we're using the most stable version of Android Studio that we can to make sure that any problems we've got are with our code and not with Android Studio's code. So I'm going to click on Apply to that. By clicking on Stable, we're getting the most stable Android Studio versions and Android SDK versions. Next, we're going to come back over here and now this time go down to Editor. Then we're going to click on General. We want to select Auto Import. Click on that. And what I suggest is to make sure that both optimize imports on the fly as well as add unambiguous imports on the fly are both selected. So basically all four options should be selected here. Click on Apply. Next, I recommend you go back to Editor again, General, which you're in, but this time we want to select Appearance. Then we want to click on and make sure that Show Line Numbers is checked. At the moment in my installation it's checked, but if your checkbox isn't ticked, make sure Show Line Numbers is checked there and click on Apply. Next we want to go down to Code Folding, so we just want to click on the option down there. We want to untick these options. First one, File Header. And take the tick box off that, so we're unchecking these, not checking them this time. Imports, one-line methods I should say, as well as closures. So make sure all of those aren't checked, and the reason is that they're for more advanced programmers, and it can cause confusion if you leave them checked because code appears to vanish. So click on Apply and then click on OK. Alright, before we finish, there are a couple of other things to check. So we're going to come over here and click on Configure, select Project Defaults, and select Project Structure. Now we want to confirm the SDK location as well as the JDK location. Now if you already had a different version JDK installed, perhaps because you're doing Java development on an earlier version, then make sure this is set to use embedded SDK, which is what Google recommend. Now if everything's okay, click on Cancel if you haven't made any changes, or click on OK to actually put the change through. But keep in mind that if you are running a 32-bit version of Windows, you want to uncheck this Use Embedded JDK, then you want to navigate to the folder that contains the JDK installation, which we've talked about previously. But in my case, I'm going to click on Use Embedded JDK because I'm running a 64-bit version. Alright, so that's pretty well all we need to do. So in this case, I'm going to click on Cancel because I didn't need to make any changes. And in the next video, we're going to start looking at HAXM again and the BIOS settings that you may need to change. But there's one more thing though that Windows users need to do. So for Windows users, what you want to do is click on Start a New Project. Then I just want you to go through and select all the defaults. So you literally don't need to change anything here. Just click on Next, click on Next, click on Next, and click on Finish. And what you may find is that while I leave that to install, is you might get something come up on the screen that looks like this. So when you're actually creating your very first project, you should get a dialog about Windows Firewall blocking some features. So what you want to do here is make sure that you allow Java to communicate on private networks. So you want to make sure you've checked private networks such as My Home or Work Network, and you want to uncheck the public networks. When you can see that usually by default the public networks is ticked. So tick on private networks and take the tick off, or uncheck public networks to make sure things work correctly on your computer. And again, this is just for Windows users. If you don't do this, you'll find some weird things start happening. You won't be able to update Android Studio properly, and many of the applications won't work properly that require access to the internet. And again, you'll have problems adding libraries to your projects and updating Android Studio and running apps if you don't do that. And you can see at the moment the application, because we've installed Android Studio for the first time, the very first application can take a while to build. I'm going to leave that building because that's really the only thing I wanted to show you for Windows users, the fact that that firewall may come up. And keep in mind that that dialog may also pop up after a Java update. If it does, remember that you must have the private network access ticked. Alright, so that's the end of this video. Let's move on now to the next one.